The tension builds. The Galactic Council had called for a special meeting, a moment that had been years in the making. From every corner of the galaxy, representatives of different species, some with skin like ice and others with scales that shimmered like gold, had gathered in the Grand Hall. Each race had their own agenda, their own vision for the future of the galaxy. But the humans were different. Their representative, Commander Lyra, stood at the center of it all, calm but with a fire burning within her. Humanity had always been seen as a young race, one that had just begun to explore the stars. But in just a few short decades, they had proven themselves a force to be reckoned with. Lyra, with her strong presence and unwavering determination, had become the face of humanity's place in the galaxy. It was a pivotal moment. This was the chance for humanity to finally be recognized as equals among the greatest species in the universe. The hall was filled with murmurs as the alien delegates took their seats. Some exchanged glances, their eyes filled with skepticism. There were those who believed that humanity was too new, too volatile to be trusted with the power of the Galactic Council. Others feared what might happen if the humans gained influence, an empire rising in the shadows, perhaps. Commander Lyra stood near the front, waiting for the session to begin. Her heart raced, but her face betrayed no emotion. She knew the weight of this moment. If humanity was accepted into the Council, they would have a say in the fate of the galaxy. If not, they would be left on the outside, struggling for a place in a galaxy that might never accept them. The meeting was about to start. As the delegates took their places, a strange tension hung in the air. Lyra could sense it. There was something off, something that didn't feel right. The usual formalities were observed, but the voices of the alien representatives seemed forced, distant. No one looked directly at each other. It was as if they were all waiting for something, or someone. Suddenly, the lights flickered. A strange hum filled the room. The massive holographic display that showed the faces of all the council members sputtered for a moment, and the room fell into a brief silence. Lyra's eyes narrowed. She had been in enough high-stakes situations to know when something was wrong. This wasn't just a technical glitch. This was something else. Then, a message blinked across the screen, an encrypted transmission. It wasn't from any known delegate. The message was simple but chilling. The council will fall. The humans will not be allowed to join. Abandon the negotiations. A gasp echoed through the hall. The atmosphere shifted instantly, turning from diplomatic politeness to quiet suspicion. Lyra's heart pounded in her chest. Who could have sent this? And why? Was it an attempt to sabotage the negotiations before they even began? As Lyra's mind raced, the council members looked at each other with growing unease. Whispers filled the room as some of them pulled up their personal datapads, attempting to verify the message. Some seemed skeptical, dismissing it as a mere hacking attempt, while others were visibly disturbed. The tension in the room was palpable. Lyra could see it in their faces, fear, anger, and confusion all mixing together. But none of them seemed to know what to do next. It was a moment that would define the entire galaxy. Would the council continue, or would this be the spark that ignited a conflict that no one was prepared for? Lyra knew that she had to act quickly. As humanity's representative, it was her duty to ensure that the peace talks didn't collapse before they had even started. But she also knew that something far bigger was at play here. This wasn't just about humanity's place in the galaxy. It was about the entire future of the galaxy itself. Her eyes scanned the room, trying to gauge the reactions of the other delegates. The alien races were divided. Some looked eager to continue, while others were already whispering about the possibility of ending the talks. Lyra took a deep breath. She had to keep her cool. The future of humanity rested on this very moment. Then, without warning, the lights flickered again, longer this time. The hum grew louder, and the room began to tremble. Panic began to spread. The alien representatives looked around nervously, unsure of what was happening. Lyra could feel the weight of their eyes on her. They were waiting for her to make a move. She had to keep the peace. She had to maintain control. But the growing sense of danger was undeniable. The message had been a warning that someone, or something, didn't want these talks to succeed. As the room continued to shake, Lyra's mind raced. Who was behind this? Who would want to sabotage the negotiations at all costs? Was it another alien race, or was it something deeper, more insidious? The meeting had just begun, but already the fragile piece of the galaxy was on the verge of collapse, and Lyra knew that in the next few hours, everything would change. The tension had built to a breaking point, and the future of the galaxy now rested in the hands of one woman and the unknown forces that lurked in the shadows. The first signs of trouble. The situation in the council hall had only grown more chaotic after the cryptic message appeared. The lights flickered once more, and this time, it wasn't just a brief flash. It was a full, eerie dimming, as if the very heart of the room was slowly shutting down. The strange humming sound from the hidden speakers continued, growing louder with each passing second. People began shifting in their seats, glancing nervously at one another. There was a palpable fear in the air, a sense that something dangerous was about to happen. Commander Lyra stood firmly, her hand resting on the table in front of her as she tried to maintain composure. Her thoughts raced, but her exterior remained calm. She had dealt with high-pressure situations before, but this felt different. This wasn't just a diplomatic issue. There was something much darker unfolding behind the scenes. The holographic projection, which usually displayed the faces of the council members, began to glitch. The faces became distorted, flickering like broken images, before one by one, they were replaced by static. The once peaceful atmosphere had been replaced by uncertainty, and the aliens were beginning to turn on one another. The systems are compromised. A representative from the Elzori species, an ancient race known for their wisdom, muttered under his breath. His pale blue skin seemed to grow even paler in the dimmed light. Someone has sabotaged the network. This cannot be a coincidence. Lyra's mind was sharp, picking up on the panic that was beginning to take hold of the room. It wasn't just the systems that were failing. It was trust itself. Who could they trust now? The tension was mounting with every passing second. "We must identify the saboteur," said the representative from the Zektar, a highly militarized species with an infamous reputation for their aggressive tactics. His voice was gruff and filled with suspicion. And quickly. If this was an attempt to destabilize the negotiations, we should assume the worst. Lyra glanced around the room. The Zektar representative was right. This wasn't just a technical glitch or a hacker's prank. It was a message, a threat. But who was sending it? The humans weren't responsible, at least, not in this moment. They had no reason to sabotage the talks, but many of the other species weren't so sure. A sharp voice interrupted her thoughts. "I refuse to believe that the negotiations will be derailed so easily. This is a clear attack on the integrity of the Council," a Tarian delegate said, her green skin shimmering in the dim light. "We cannot allow one person's agenda to disrupt the future of our galaxy." The room began to hum with voices arguing, accusations flying in every direction. Some pointed fingers at the human delegation. Others accused the mysterious alien races who were rarely seen but had a history of creating chaos when things didn't go their way. No one knew who to trust. Everyone was on edge, and suspicion ran high. It was clear that this wasn't just about the humans anymore. This was about a power struggle far larger than anyone had anticipated. Lyra stood at the center of the chaos, trying to make sense of everything. In the midst of the arguing, one thing became very clear. This wasn't a random sabotage. This was planned. Someone wanted the negotiations to fail, and they were willing to do anything to make it happen. Just as the accusations reached a fever pitch, a voice rang out through the chamber, sending a chill down everyone's spine. It wasn't one of the delegates, but rather an automated message that echoed through the hall. "The Galactic Council is broken. The decision is made. Humanity will not join. There is no place for you here." A wave of shock washed over the room. The voice wasn't just a glitch. It was deliberate, almost too confident, as though the speaker knew their words would shatter the fragile peace that had existed just moments ago. A sense of dread filled the air. Was this the work of a rogue faction within the council? Or was there a larger force at play, working in the shadows to keep humanity at bay? Lyra's mind raced. This was no longer just a diplomatic issue. It had become a matter of survival. If the council could be so easily manipulated, what else could be at stake? Were there greater forces at work, hidden deep within the galaxy, pulling the strings? She straightened up, looking each delegate in the eye. "We will not back down," she said, her voice steady, though every part of her was on alert. "Humanity has earned its place in the galaxy. We will not be pushed aside." The tension in the room was thick, but Lyra knew that now was the time for action. The Galactic Council was teetering on the brink of collapse, and if humanity wanted to survive, they had to act swiftly and decisively. But as the room fell into an uneasy silence, Lyra couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of something far worse. Someone had set the stage for chaos, and soon the galaxy would feel the consequences. As she watched the alien representatives exchange uncertain glances, Lyra couldn't help but wonder, was the message meant to intimidate them into submission? Or was it a warning that things were about to spiral out of control, and humanity would be left to pick up the pieces? The council splits. The room had descended into chaos. Delegates from all across the galaxy, once united in the idea of peace and collaboration, were now split in their loyalties. The accusations flew like daggers. No one trusted anyone anymore. Some believed the sabotage was an inside job. Others insisted it was an outside attack, a warning to the council itself. But no matter where the blame was placed, the truth remained. The Galactic Council was on the brink of collapse, and humanity's future hung in the balance. Commander Lyra stood at the front, her fists clenched at her sides. She had expected tension, but nothing had prepared her for this level of mistrust. It was as though a crack had appeared in the very foundation of the galaxy's unity. Once, the Council had been a beacon of hope for all species. Now it felt like a ticking time bomb, ready to explode into civil war. "We must continue the negotiations." Lyra's voice cut through the noise, sharp and demanding. The room quieted, but only slightly. It was clear that not everyone shared her conviction. One of the delegates, a member of the Vizari species, a race known for their logical minds and calm demeanor, spoke up. "How can we continue? There is no trust left. If we are to decide on anything, we must first root out the traitor among us." The words hung in the air, as everyone turned their eyes to one another. Who could be trusted now? The sabotage had not only disabled their systems, it had disabled the very spirit of cooperation. "We can't afford to fight amongst ourselves," Lyra said, trying to regain control of the situation. "This council represents the future of the galaxy. If we fall apart, what hope is there for any of us?" Her words were met with murmurs of doubt. The Zektar representative, a burly creature with dark, armored skin, slammed his fist onto the table. "This is why we should have never let the humans in," he roared, his voice full of anger. "You are the ones who have disrupted the balance. This chaos is your fault." The room fell silent once again. The Zektar's words struck a nerve, and the atmosphere shifted. Lyra's heart sank. There it was, the open hostility. The humans had been blamed for the sabotage, even though there was no evidence linking them to it. They had become the scapegoat for the Council's unraveling. "This isn't about blaming anyone," Lyra shouted, her patience finally breaking. "We are all on the same side here. The real enemy isn't any one of us. It's the forces that want to see us divided. The galaxy will fall into chaos if we can't put aside our differences." But even as she spoke, Lyra knew her words were falling on deaf ears. The rift between the factions had deepened, and now the council was divided into two very distinct camps. One side wanted to push forward with the negotiations, believing that humanity's inclusion was the key to saving the galaxy. The other side, led by the Zektar and other hardline races, called for an immediate halt to any further discussions, convinced that humanity's rise was a threat to the established order. "Perhaps Lyra is right," said the Terrian delegate, her voice shaking. "But how can we move forward when we don't know who is working against us? How can we trust a system that has already been compromised?" The Vezari representative nodded gravely. "We can't. There's no point in continuing this farce. We must end the council and rebuild from scratch." And just like that, the council was split into two factions, each with its own vision of how to proceed. One side called for unity, believing that humanity's inclusion was the only way forward. The other side, fearful of the unknown consequences of humanity's influence, wanted to dissolve the entire council and abandon any hope of peace. Lyra felt the weight of their distrust. She knew she couldn't change their minds overnight, but she couldn't afford to give up now. The galaxy needed the council. The galaxy needed peace, and humanity's place in that peace was vital. As the debate raged on, Lyra stepped away from the table. She needed space to think. The tension in the room had become unbearable, and she could feel the eyes of every delegate watching her. Could she be the one to bring them back together? Or would she be forced to lead humanity into a war to protect their future? She stared out of the window, the vast expanse of stars stretching before her. For a brief moment, she found herself wondering if there was still hope for the council. But deep down, she knew the truth. The galaxy was already on the brink of disaster. The sabotage had only been the first sign. The divisions in the council were widening by the minute, and now, Lyra realized with a sinking heart, the galaxy's future might very well depend on her alone. But what could one human do against an entire galaxy of powerful races and shattered alliances? Lyra's gamble. The Galactic Council was on the brink of disaster. Divided into two factions, each growing more distrustful and aggressive by the minute, the once hopeful negotiations were now all but a memory. The sabotage had ignited a firestorm of accusations, and the spark of chaos was spreading rapidly. The stakes were higher than ever, and Commander Lyra felt the weight of the galaxy pressing down on her shoulders. She couldn't let the council fall apart. Humanity couldn't afford the collapse of this fragile peace, and yet every attempt to unite the fractured council seemed to only deepen the rift. Every word she spoke, every gesture she made, seemed to make things worse. As the debate continued, Lyra realized that simply pleading for peace wasn't enough anymore. The time for diplomatic niceties had passed. She needed to take a stand, one that would show both the council and the galaxy that humanity was not to be underestimated. The Zektar, the Terrian, and the Vezari, all of them had their own agendas. Some were motivated by fear, others by greed, and still others by ancient rivalries. There was no common ground between them anymore. The sabotage had stripped away any illusion of unity. It had exposed the council for what it truly was, a fractured assembly of beings, each looking out for their own interests. Lyra's mind raced as she paced the room, searching for a solution. She knew that if humanity was to survive in this galaxy, it needed to be part of the council. But what if the council itself was beyond saving? What if the only way forward was to take matters into their own hands? The thought hit her like a sudden wave. What if she could use the chaos to her advantage? What if, instead of fighting to restore the council, she could create a new path for humanity, one that didn't rely on the unstable foundation of the Galactic Council? She paused, her eyes narrowing with determination. A dangerous idea formed in her mind. Perhaps humanity needed to break free from the Council's control to forge their own destiny. But doing so would not come without consequences. A direct challenge to the Council could lead to war. It could lead to the destruction of everything they had worked for. But if the Council was already falling apart, perhaps humanity had no other choice. She could gamble everything on the future of her people. With a deep breath, Lyra turned to her trusted advisor, Captain Jackson. He had stood by her through countless battles, and now he was the one she would turn to for advice. "Captain," she began, her voice steady but filled with urgency, I think it's time we consider a different path. Jackson raised an eyebrow, sensing the shift in her tone. You're thinking of going rogue, aren't you? Lyra nodded. The council is broken. They'll never accept humanity as an equal if they can't even keep themselves together. If we stay here, we'll be crushed under the weight of their indecision. But if we take action now, we can seize control of our own future. The captain's expression softened, but his eyes remained sharp. It's a dangerous move, Commander. If the factions discover what you're planning. I know, Lyra interrupted, but we can't sit idly by while the galaxy falls into chaos. We have to show the Council, and the entire galaxy, that humanity is not just a pawn to be played. We're not waiting for permission anymore. We'll carve our own path, no matter the cost. Jackson thought for a moment, then nodded. I'm with you, Lyra. But we'll need support. We can't do this alone. Lyra turned her gaze back to the council chamber. The two factions were still locked in heated debate, their voices rising and falling with increasing intensity. It was clear that this was a battle they would never win through diplomacy alone. She needed to act quickly, before the opportunity slipped away. She stood up straighter, her voice carrying across the room. Enough, she called, her words cutting through the noise like a knife. The room fell silent. All eyes were on her, and for a moment, she felt the weight of the entire galaxy on her shoulders. This is it, she said, her voice firm. The Galactic Council is dead. The negotiations are over. We can either continue to bicker and destroy each other, or we can move forward, and humanity can lead the way. I'm not here to beg for a seat at your table. I'm here to tell you that humanity will rise, with or without your approval. If you choose to stand in our way, we will fight for our place in this galaxy. You've been warned. The room was dead silent. Lyra's words hung in the air like a challenge, a declaration of war to anyone who dared oppose humanity's rise. She knew she had just made a dangerous move, but there was no turning back now. As she turned to leave, she felt a mixture of fear and exhilaration. The Council might never forgive her for this, but at least now, humanity had a chance to shape its own destiny. Outside the chamber, the captain and his crew were already making preparations. Lyra's gamble had begun. The future of humanity was no longer in the hands of the Council. It was in their own hands. The galaxy would soon know that humanity would never bow down. Chaos unleash. The shockwaves from Lyra's declaration reverberated across the galaxy. What had been a room filled with confusion and fear was now a battleground of ideologies. Humanity had drawn a line in the sand, and the galaxy would never be the same. The Zektar and the Terrians, the factions that had opposed humanity's inclusion in the Galactic Council, were furious. They saw Lyra's bold declaration not as an act of defiance, but as an act of war. The Zektar, with their militaristic tendencies, immediately began mobilizing their fleets, preparing for what they saw as an inevitable confrontation. The Terrians, too, began calling for their forces to assemble, wary of the consequences of allowing humanity to rise unchecked. But it wasn't just the Zektar and Terrians. As word spread, more races began to take sides. Some, who had once been neutral, were now considering their options. For the first time in generations, alliances that had seemed unbreakable began to fracture. The galaxy was on the brink of war, and no one was sure which way it would tip. Lyra stood in the command center aboard humanity's flagship, the Vanguard. The ship hummed with activity as her officers worked quickly to prepare for whatever came next. The bridge was filled with tension, the air thick with urgency. The crew had always followed Lyra with unwavering loyalty, but now, as they faced the storm she had just unleashed, their resolve would be tested like never before. "Commander," Captain Jackson's voice broke through the silence. "We've just received reports from several fleets in the Outer Rim. They're already beginning to mobilize. We've got reports of skirmishes breaking out on the borders." Lyra clenched her fists, feeling the weight of the decision pressing on her shoulders. The gamble had been made, and now there was no turning back. "Get the Vanguard into position," she ordered, her voice steady but filled with determination. "We need to be ready for anything. This isn't just a fight for humanity's survival anymore. This is a fight for the future of the galaxy." As the fleet moved into position, Lyra stared out of the window, watching the stars pass by. In the distance, she could see the first signs of war. The calm of space had been shattered, replaced by the bright flashes of distant explosions. The first battle was already underway. But it wasn't just the military forces that were mobilizing. The sabotage that had first thrown the Council into disarray had opened a floodgate of distrust. The Galactic Council's network of communication was compromised, and now factions were taking matters into their own hands. Leaders of the major races were making secret deals, plotting their next moves. Some even began rallying their people, preparing for an all-out galactic war. On the vanguard, Lyra turned to her communications officer. "Is there any way to communicate with the other factions?" she asked. "We need to speak directly with the Terrians and Zektar. They need to understand that this isn't about war. It's about humanity's place in this galaxy." The officer's face flickered with uncertainty. "The Council's communications grid is down. We've tried reaching out, but it's almost impossible to make contact without the proper channels. The sabotage is widespread." Lyra nodded, realizing that they were cut off from the very institution that was supposed to keep the peace. She had no choice but to make her stand with her people. They could no longer rely on the fractured Council to determine their fate. Humanity would have to carve out its own path, even if that meant fighting for it. The first confrontation came sooner than expected. The Zektar fleet, a formidable force known for their battle-hardened warriors, engaged a neutral trade convoy in the Outer Rim, demanding their allegiance. As Lyra watched the battle unfold on the ship's screens, she knew that the galaxy was descending into chaos. If the Zektar were allowed to bully the galaxy into submission, humanity's voice would be silenced forever. "We can't let this stand," Lyra said, her voice cold with resolve. "Prepare the fleet. We're going to stop the Zektar." Captain Jackson looked at her, his face unreadable. "Are you sure about this, Commander?" Engaging the Zektar now could ignite a full-scale war. Lyra met his gaze. "It's already started. We've waited too long to take action. This is the only way to show the galaxy that humanity will not be intimidated." As the Vanguard and its fleet moved toward the conflict, Lyra knew this was a turning point. She wasn't just leading humanity through a diplomatic crisis. She was leading them into battle for their future. The Zektar fleet was massive, and they weren't known for retreating. As Lyra's fleet approached, her heart raced. This was it. The first shot had been fired, and the galaxy was about to learn what humanity was capable of. The battle began with a flash of light as the two fleets collided. The Vanguard unleashed its powerful energy weapons, cutting through the darkness of space as the Zektar retaliated with ferocity. Explosions rocked the ship as lasers flew in every direction. The noise of the battle was deafening, even through the comms. Lyra's mind was focused, each decision weighed carefully as the battle raged on. She could hear the commands being given, the orders flying across the communication lines. But in the midst of the chaos, Lyra saw a clear path. Humanity's strength wasn't in numbers, but in their adaptability, their courage. And now they had the chance to prove it. As the battle continued to unfold, Lyra realized that this was more than just a military fight. This was the beginning of a new chapter. Whether humanity would be remembered as the saviors of the galaxy or the instigators of its destruction would be determined by how they fought in the coming hours. But no matter the cost, Lyra knew one thing for certain: humanity's fate would no longer be decided by others. They would decide it for themselves. Humanity's resolve. The battle between humanity and the Zektar raged on, its ferocity unlike anything the galaxy had seen in centuries. The Vanguard was taking hits, its hull shuddering with each explosion, but Lyra's resolve only grew stronger. As the human fleet fought with everything it had, it became clear that this was no longer just a skirmish. This was the first real test of humanity's place in the galaxy, a test they could not afford to fail. Lyra stood at the center of the bridge, her eyes fixed on the tactical display as her crew worked tirelessly to outmaneuver the Zektar. The Vanguard was smaller than the Zektar flagship, but humanity had something that the Zektar didn't: determination. Lyra knew that they had to hold their ground, no matter the odds. If they could survive this battle, they could prove that humanity was more than just a young race struggling to find its place. "Status report," Lyra demanded, her voice sharp as the noise of the battle filtered through the comms. The ship was in the thick of it now, and every second counted. "Shields holding at 40%, Commander," Lieutenant Darren called out. "We've lost 2 of our fighter squadrons, but we're keeping the Zektar fleet on the defensive. Their ships are well armored, but they're disorganized. If we keep pushing, we can break their line." Lyra nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. "Push harder. Make sure they know we're not backing down." But as the battle unfolded, a new, darker reality began to emerge. The Zektar weren't just fighting for supremacy, they were fighting to survive. The alien race, known for their ruthlessness, had sent their best soldiers, and their desperation was becoming clear. They weren't just trying to defeat humanity, they were trying to crush any hope of resistance in the galaxy. Lyra's mind raced. She knew they had to win this battle, not only for humanity's future, but for the future of the entire galaxy. If they lost, the Zektar would use their victory as leverage to dominate the other races. The fragile alliances of the Council would crumble, and the galaxy would descend into an endless war. But humanity had something the Zektar hadn't anticipated: unity. As the battle continued, Lyra's communications officer, Lieutenant Rila, approached her with a new report. "Commander, we're getting word from several neutral systems. They're offering their support. They want to see humanity succeed." Lyra's eyes widened as the significance of the message hit her. Support? From whom? The Vraxin Coalition, the Nilari Trade Union, and a few others. They've been watching the conflict closely. They see humanity's resolve and are willing to offer ships and supplies to bolster our forces. Lyra's chest tightened. This was unexpected, but it was also exactly what they needed. Humanity's gamble was paying off. The galaxy's neutral factions, which had once remained on the sidelines, were now willing to join the fight. Humanity was no longer alone. "We can win this," Lyra muttered to herself, more to reassure herself than anyone else. She turned back to the battle at hand. "Coordinate with the Vraxin. We'll push the Zektar back with everything we've got." Her mind was no longer focused solely on the Vanguard's survival. Humanity had found its allies in the most unlikely of places. This was no longer just a battle between 2 species. It was a turning point in the galaxy's future. With the support of these new allies, Lyra pushed forward with renewed vigor. The human fleet, bolstered by reinforcements, began to gain the upper hand. The Zektar, sensing their tenuous grip on the battle slipping away, began to retreat. The first signs of victory were in sight, and Lyra knew that they couldn't let up. They had to win this battle decisively, or else the Zektar would simply regroup and return with a vengeance. Minutes turned into hours as the battle raged on, but slowly, steadily, humanity's forces began to break through the Zektar's defenses. The Zektar flagship, the Karnak, loomed large on the battlefield, its weapons firing relentlessly, but it was losing strength. The Vanguard and its allies were gaining ground, pushing the Zektar back. "Commander," Lieutenant Darren's voice rang out. "The Zektar flagship is falling back. They're breaking formation." Lyra took a deep breath. The tide was turning, but they weren't out of danger yet. "Maintain the pressure. We can't let them escape." As the Vanguard led the charge, the Zektar flagship Karnak finally made a desperate move to retreat, but it was too late. The human fleet, now reinforced with new allies, surrounded it. In a final, coordinated strike, the Karnak's shields collapsed, and the Zektar flagship was forced to surrender. The battle was over. Humanity had won. Lyra stood at the center of the bridge, watching as the final moments of the Zektar fleet unfolded. It had been a hard-fought victory, but they had emerged victorious. Her crew cheered as the news spread across the fleet. For the first time in the battle, Lyra allowed herself a moment of relief. They had done it. Humanity had proven its strength. But as she stared out into the vast expanse of space, Lyra knew this was only the beginning. The Zector had been defeated, but the galaxy was far from peaceful. The Council was fractured beyond repair, and new challenges were sure to rise. Humanity had made its mark, but the real fight for their place in the galaxy was just beginning. "Prepare for the next phase," Lyra said softly, her eyes never leaving the stars. "The future of the galaxy is ours to shape." The final showdown. The Vanguard drifted silently through the cold vastness of space, its battle-worn hull a testament to the brutal conflict that had unfolded. The hum of the ship's engines was a welcome sound after the chaos of the previous days. Lyra stood on the bridge, her hands clasped behind her back, her gaze fixed on the distant stars. The battle had been won, but there was no sense of victory. Not yet. Humanity had proven its strength. The Zector had been defeated, but the galaxy was still divided. The Galactic Council, once the beacon of hope for peace, had crumbled beyond repair. In the wake of the chaos, there was no longer a single voice to guide the galaxy. No unified force to maintain order. It was up to humanity now. But what kind of galaxy would they inherit? "We've done it, Commander," Captain Jackson said, his voice steady but filled with awe. "The Zector fleet has surrendered. The neutral systems are rallying behind us. It's over." Lyra nodded, but her expression remained unreadable. It's never truly over. The galaxy is still in chaos. We've won the battle, but the war for peace is just beginning. The communication officer spoke up, her voice cutting through the tension. "Commander, we're receiving a transmission from the Nilari Trade Union. They wish to speak with you directly." Lyra's heart skipped a beat. The Nilari, once neutral, were now one of humanity's most powerful allies. The fact that they were reaching out meant something significant. She turned to Captain Jackson, who gave her a slight nod. "Patch it through," Lyra said. The holographic display in front of her flickered, and the face of a Nilari representative appeared. An alien with sleek silver skin and sharp, calculating eyes. His name was Ralzar, and he had quickly become one of humanity's most outspoken supporters during the conflict. "Commander Lyra," Ralzar said, his voice calm but full of purpose, "humanity has proven itself on the battlefield. You have shown the galaxy that you are a force to be reckoned with. But now you must prove that you can lead. The neutral factions are rallying behind you, but there is a question we all need an answer to. Will you unite the galaxy or fracture it further?" Lyra held his gaze, feeling the weight of his words. The question was simple, yet it carried the weight of the future. She had fought for humanity's place in the galaxy, but now, the true challenge lay in shaping that place into something that could endure. "I will unite the galaxy," Lyra said, her voice unwavering. "But it will take time. The old structures are gone, and we can't afford to rebuild them with the same old ideas. Humanity will lead, but we will lead by example, by bringing the galaxy together, not through force, but through understanding." Ralzar studied her for a long moment before nodding. "We will stand with you, Commander. The future is yours to shape. But remember, unity is not just about survival. It is about progress. The galaxy is watching. Do not let it fall into chaos." The transmission ended, and the room fell silent once again. Lyra turned to her crew, her mind racing. The future of the galaxy rested in their hands, and the road ahead was uncertain. There would be resistance. There always was when change was on the horizon. But humanity had shown that they had the courage and resolve to face whatever came next. "We've made a mark on this galaxy," Lyra said, her voice carrying across the bridge. "But now we have to make sure we leave it better than we found it." With that, she turned and strode toward the exit. There was no time to waste. The galaxy needed leadership, and humanity was going to give it to them. The Vanguard would be humanity's symbol, not just of strength, but of hope. The galaxy had seen what they were capable of in the heat of battle, but it was now time to prove that they could bring about lasting peace. They would need allies. They would need patience. And above all, they would need to trust that humanity, despite its youth, had the wisdom to lead. As the ship moved toward the heart of the galaxy, Lyra looked out into the stars once more. The war was over, but the fight for the galaxy's future had just begun. And this time, humanity would take the lead, not with the sword, but with the promise of a new way forward. The galaxy would remember the rise of humanity, not as conquerors, but as unifiers. They had fought for their place, and now they would fight for the future of every species. And for the first time in ages, the stars seemed just a little brighter.